There's a particular smell to a room where herbs hang drying, dusty and green and faintly sweet, strongest up near the rafters where the warm air collects. Among the bunches there would almost always be sage. The medieval physicians of Salerno had a saying about it. "Why should a man die?" they asked, "when sage grows in his garden?" They half meant it. Sage was thought to hold off death itself. The word apothecary simply means a storehouse, a keeper of supplies, and that's a good clue to what the work really was. The shelves of remedies didn't come from nowhere. Most of them began as plants, and many of those plants began in a patch of earth that the apothecary tended with his own hands. Step through the shop and out the back, and you'd often find the real heart of the business. A garden. Not a grand one, usually just a modest plot squeezed behind the building or a strip of ground nearby. But it was working land, every inch of it given over to plants with a purpose. There'd be sage with its soft grey-green leaves, vervain, slender and a little plain, plantain, not the banana, but the low, broad-leaved weed that grows in any trodden ground, valued for centuries for soothing cuts and stings, and dozens more besides, each in its own bed, each known by sight and smell and touch. These plants weren't bought in. They were grown season after season, then harvested and dried and put away. Picture bunches hanging upside down from the rafters, drying slowly in the air. Roots laid out on cloth, seeds tucked into little pots, and then the jars, earthenware and glass, holding powders and dried leaves labelled and lined up, ready for the day someone came to the counter needing help. In Tudor England, the guild could call its members to account for what sat in those jars, asking them to bring in a set number of dried specimens each year to be looked over and judged sound and true to their name. So the apothecary's day didn't really start at the counter. It started here, in the dirt, with a basket and a knife. Growing medicine was patient work, and a great deal of it came down to timing. An apothecary had to know when each plant was at its strongest. Some leaves are best picked just before the plant flowers. Some roots are best lifted in autumn, once the plant has pulled its goodness down into the ground for winter. Get the moment wrong and you'd still have a plant, but a weaker one, less use in a remedy. So they watched the seasons closely, and they kept notes. Which corner of the garden caught the morning sun? Which bed stayed damp when the first frost usually came? And which plants needed bringing in before it did? The old word for the strength in a plant was its virtue, and drying was where that virtue could so easily be lost. Dry a herb too fast or in too much heat, and it crumbles to dust with little left in it. Dry it too slowly in a damp room, and it goes mouldy and spoils. So they learned the careful middle way, somewhere shaded, somewhere with moving air. And they learned it mostly by getting it wrong. A good dried root they would judge by hand and nose. Valerian, for one, was tested by its sharp, earthy smell and the way it snapped between the fingers, the strength of the scent telling them how much virtue still lived in it. That really is how the whole craft was built, by repetition and by failure. If the coltsfoot didn't flower one year, you'd think about why. Too much shade, perhaps. Too wet. And next spring you'd try a different corner and see what happened. There were no quick answers, just the slow turning of one year into the next, and a memory of what each year had taught. Now you might imagine each apothecary hunched over his own private plot, keeping his secrets close, and some of that surely happened. But the picture was warmer than that and more neighborly. Many towns had what was called a physic garden, physic being the old word for medicine and healing. These were shared growing grounds. Gardens of medicinal plants are known from at least the year 800, often tended by monks, who set aside a section of the monastery grounds just for healing herbs. Over the centuries, the idea spread out into the towns themselves. In a shared physic garden, apothecaries held their beds side by side. Each tended his own patch, but the wall between one person's knowledge and another's was low and easy to step over. They swapped seeds, they passed cuttings across. They warned each other when a particular pest was about or when a late frost had caught someone's young plants. Some gardens even kept beds of the cheats and counterfeits of the trade, the plants that dishonest dealers passed off as costlier ones, grown on purpose so that apprentices could learn to tell the true herb from the false by holding the two side by side. Slowly, between them, they built up a shared sense of what grew well in their own local soil, which was not at all the same from one town to the next. In some places, the guilds, the trade associations that governed crafts, kept a loose hand on all this. There might be rules about which plants a member could grow, or how the common ground was to be shared. The most famous of these gardens came a little later. The Chelsea Physic Garden in London, founded in 1673 by the Society of Apothecaries, where plants could be grown, studied and learned from. But the habit behind it was much older, neighbors growing medicine together and pooling what they knew. It's a gentle thing to picture. People who were, in a sense, rivals in trade, kneeling in the same garden of an evening, comparing how the sage had fared and handing a fistful of seed across the path. Once the harvest was in and dried and stored, the second half of the craft began, turning plants into medicine. A dried root might be crushed in a mortar to a fine powder. Leaves might be steeped in wine or vinegar, the liquid drawing out their strength. Other plants were simmered into thick syrups, sweetened to make them easier to take, or worked into salves and poultices to be laid on the skin. A poultice is just that, soft plant matter, often warmed, spread on a cloth and bound over a wound or an aching joint. The grandest preparation of all was theriac, a single medicine blended from dozens of ingredients, sometimes 60 or more, even the flesh of vipers among them. It could take weeks to make, then was left to settle and mature for months, sometimes years, before it was thought ready. The skill here wasn't only in knowing which plant did what, it was in knowing how to coax the good out of it and in what amount. The same plant could soothe in a small dose and harm in a large one, and a careful apothecary knew the difference. Some of these remedies genuinely helped, some did little or nothing. We know now that real medicines hide inside ordinary plants, quinine in tree bark and opium used for pain since the most ancient records, drawn from the poppy. The apothecaries didn't understand the chemistry. They couldn't have. But through all that watching and trying, they sometimes landed on things that worked. Other times they didn't. The records can't always tell us which was which. And it all came back to that quiet plot of earth behind the shop. The smell of crushed sage on someone's hands, bundles of herbs swinging gently from a beam, a row of jars catching the last of the daylight. Somewhere in the dimming room, a hand presses a paper label onto the side of a jar, smooths it flat, and sets the jar back on the shelf with the rest. The day's work put away, the garden outside settling into the dark.